Hello, everyone, my beautiful friends. So happy to see you guys, especially on a Tuesday afternoon. Such a good way to break up the day. Today we're going to be talking about the topic of is it me or is it how I was raised? Which is, as we know, such a big topic of conversation among psychologists and many, many others. So we'll dive into the meat of it. First, I just wanted to acknowledge you guys for taking time to be here live. I know live is so different than watching a recording after, but nonetheless, you're going to get so much out of this time together. And hopefully, you can be in a space where you can just receive and be open. Feel free to grab a notebook so you can take notes if that serves you and feels good for you. Um, Beautiful. I'm going to share screen right now and feel free to let me know in the chat if you guys, for whatever reason, can't hear me at any point or can't see the screen, all that good stuff. And we'll just give everyone else some time to hop on. So here we are today with our live webinar, Is It Me or Is It How I Was Raised? As you guys know, this is our 60-minute training that helps us really understand the difference between nurture and nature. And that conversation is a big one as it allows us to take responsibility for some of the things that we're navigating on a daily basis. Let's start with just a little introduction. I know most of you know me, but some of the people on here don't, and some of the people that will be watching this later are also new. So let's talk. I'm Ashley, and I'm a yoga therapist. I'm a teacher, I'm a leader, and I teach not only just classes that span from fitness, yoga, meditation, but I also lead different teacher training programs within the healing industries, breathwork, meditation, yoga. I'm also a holistic coach, and I work with people in group settings and one-on-ones through either retreats or programs, online challenges, and as well as live stream different work online. So this work is incredibly important to me. I feel like learning skills and understanding a little bit more about the way we operate and interact with the world, I think is more important than almost anything else that we learn on a daily basis. Learning how to market our businesses or fulfill, social media positions, or as we know, we have some recruiters on here. We've got some people in the healing spaces, or maybe you are an account exec or things like that. Like those things are all incredibly important because they are rooted in production and efficiency and like what are we doing to make more money or build a company in a way that grows or add value to a certain organization. However, there's this aspect of humanness that I think has been really lost long term in the way that we learn and understand. So, this work is incredibly important to me, and I find that everything that we do in this world is all about relationship. So, the relationship and way that we interact with the people around us, our contributions and purpose, money, sex, religion, values, boundaries, like all of those things are based on relationship. How do we relate to that topic? And how do we interact with that topic in a way that either supports us in feeling good and happy and healed and peaceful, or in a way that maybe drives us up the wall sometimes, because we know that that most definitely can be a factor too. And thank you guys for all of you that are popping on just now. So happy to see you. Cool. So let's start with just a little grounding. I know some of you are on your lunch hour, but if you could just take one moment to just soften yourself. And if you're in a seated posture with your legs crossed, that's fine. Or if you're in a chair, just plant your feet on the ground. And together, let's just close our eyes and just take a moment to observe what's happening internally. And big breath in and gently exhale. And for a moment, just acknowledge your upbringing. What are some of the things that you were taught that you are now aware of? That maybe you previously operated from a place of autopilot, of this is just how I do things versus this is how I do things now. And take a moment to ground your being into a space of compassion where you can receive this information and this content in a way that informs and allows evolution, but also expands your heart too. Because in the wisdom and understanding of all of us just simply doing the best that we can, there's a lot of room for compassion. There's a lot of room for surrender and for just allowing ourselves to receive information in a way that nourishes our understanding of how we operate in the world instead of makes us at fault for how we operate in the world. So allow yourself to be relieved of any shame or doubt or fear or anything that's pulling you outside of the truth that is within yourself already. And just take a few breaths here. Feel into that space in your heart. I'm open and I'm appreciative of all that came before me so I can understand all that I am now and all of where I'm going. And in your time, when you feel ready, you can begin to blink your eyes back open, just finding yourself back in the space with all of our amazing other friends and maybe a little different perspective than the running dialogue of whatever your days look like today. I'm not really sure, but I know that when we get in the busyness of doing, it's really hard to be. So the idea right now is that we get a little space to be. Like all the things we probably were worried about today, I imagine in this moment after that breath, like don't even matter. You're like, oh, well, there I am. Here I am. And actually, this work of challenging how we were raised or some of the programming that still lingers is saying, oh, here I am. Here's my inner self. Here's my true essence. Here's my nature versus all the different seasons of the life we've had and where we're at right now. It's like, here is the soul that's infinite. Here is the soul that I get to connect with. And you guys can add in the chat if you want, or maybe just pause with this question and consider, how often do you catch yourself observing your own behavior by defending it, by saying to yourself or others, this is the way I am? And I still really catch myself in this often, where I'll have a certain thought process or a certain way of being that I'm like, this is just how I am. This is just how I am. And in that, the missing link is challenging that this is how I am and what attaches me to this way of being. How did I get here? What brought me into this space? And when I say behavior, I mean coping mechanisms. I mean the way you respond to people when you get rubbed the wrong way. I know Sam's been texting me a lot from overseas, and she's like, it's so interesting to observe certain behaviors within my family since I haven't been around them in a while and I've been working on myself so much. Even what is the response to that? Because while we can be, away from our families or away from our conditioning, it's pretty easy to kind of choose and be like, oh, well, if I'm away from that, it's easy to not fall into that. And then when you're back in those spaces, which I can attest to that right now because I've stayed with my mom for a couple days now, and I'm like, whoa, like now it all makes sense. Like I understand where I'm coming from, is you get to observe even how you show up in the presence of that. Because as we know, our triggers are our teachers. So whatever is showing up that's putting any discord within us, anytime we feel something inside of us that's like resistance or a little flag, whether it's red or not, we might see it as green, but it could be a red flag of what's happening here. That's an opportunity to take that information and say, I'm going to lean into this and I'm going to get curious about this. It's a big one. And then the next part, and this is me asking selfishly because like this is how I grew up, is how many of you did not get acknowledged unless you did something correct, impressive, or well? Like there wasn't a whole lot of I see you in moments that there wasn't a reason, quote, to be seen. And it took me a while to uncover and re-understand that. And even now, we were at the Renaissance Fair on Saturday. I was with my mom, and there was like this. I was with really our whole family, but I was looking at the stage, and this magician was on stage, and he called some little kids up, and they were like doing some funny magic tricks. And the little girl, she was really young. She was like maybe 4. She was tiny, and he kept trying to like make jokes with her, but she was really nervous, and she kept looking at her mom. And my mom said to me, she goes, "You used to do that. Like you would always look at me when you were on stage in like school performances or something, you would always look for me." And I realized in that moment how much more that validated my understanding of like, oh, I was looking for approval always. I was always just looking to be acknowledged regardless of what I was doing. And it's not to say that everyone needs to be acknowledged all the time, no matter what, like, see me, see me, see me. But when you only get seen for something you do that's impressive or correct versus being seen when you do something incorrect, it creates a complex that that's how we have to operate in the world, that we're not deserving of being acknowledged if we fuck up or mess up or do something that's not right, if you will. And so how the alternative would be that could be really healthy is for us to start um, acknowledging mistakes as feedback, or acknowledging doing something incorrectly or doing something that's unimpressive as, wow, like this is fun. Let me just sit in this for a second. Let me understand where I could have done things differently in the future, or how did it make me feel to show up like this, and give us a little bit more interaction with it. But if you consider the way we interact on a daily basis, like, hey, how's it going? How are you? Good. How are you? That's the surface baseline. And if you actually were to say, how are you? A lot of times, if someone were to share with you what they're actually navigating, if you don't have like the capacity for it, you wouldn't have the time to spend to hold that space. And I'll put this in the context of like, parents with young children is like, maybe when your kid wakes up in the morning, you're not like, how are you feeling today? And actually giving them space. It's kind of like, okay, let's get in the car. We got to go. It's time for school. It's time for breakfast or whatever it is. And even we do that with ourselves, whether we move our bodies in the morning or whatever our routine is. We don't even say, how are you to ourselves. So to create space for, I'm not correct, I'm not impressive, or I'm not well, that is something that has to be relearned from all of us right now in this moment, because we've chosen to be on this webinar or watch this recording. Is that like, I'm willing to look at things that are not impressive a little bit differently, so that my baseline becomes more in the neutral space versus always having to chase after something that looks good. Okay. My story, there's a lot of layers here, but I'll give you the baseline of my experience of reality from a young age. And there are a couple things that are more poignant, and I'll kind of weave some things in as we go. Um, but I grew up, in Los Angeles. When I was really young, my parents separated, and the divorce took a little over 10 years. So you can imagine it was a pretty brutal experience between my parents, observing them not being able to be on the same page with literally almost anything, whether it was financial, like money, or how they were raising us or how they were taking care of us. And I have a brother that's 2 years older than me. And during our upbringing, we would always go from one house to the next every single week. So it was 1 week mom, 1 week dad, 1 week mom, 1 week dad. And with that, and I'm just giving you guys the logistics to start with, that is, pack your suitcase and go, pack your suitcase and go, pack your suitcase and go, because I didn't have like two sets of things in both places that made me feel at home. So my sense of stability already in that sense was just felt a little rocked, because there wasn't one solid space where I felt like I could create my own relationship with self. Um, and also, my brother navigated just a lot of interesting stuff with the school system, which the school system is kind of a joke, completely a joke, let's be honest. And so he had college level reading skills in fifth grade, but he couldn't do like writing comprehension reports on paper. So automatically, they didn't really have a lot of options besides to put him in special ed. So he was alongside kids with much more severe issues, kids that were in wheelchairs and kids with severe autism and things like that. And he didn't need that kind of help, but he did need a different type of help that he didn't receive. So my parents had a lot of separate viewpoints on that and how that worked, how that operated, and if he should be on meds, if he should be with a teacher or a therapist, or how that all worked. So I definitely felt like my needs got put to the side oftentimes, because that was the loudest conversation in the room. My mom also comes from a background of being a refugee. She was born in Cairo in Egypt. And when she was, I think, 1 or 2, they had to flee because they were Jewish. So there weren't any Jews allowed in Egypt at that time. So her dad used to line their suitcases with money to escape and to run from place to place. And they went to Germany, they went to Paris, and eventually they went to LA when she was 11, and she spoke no English. She only spoke French, and she got teased a lot in school. They didn't have a lot of money. But through that, her story developed that money is security. And so that, of course, was imprinted onto my relationship with money and my relationship with stability around security, that it was like always, if you don't have this, you're not going to be okay. And so in that was like a severe amount of clenching, like not being able to find financial fluidity or freedom or abundance in that space. Even though we had, our needs were completely met, there was just an energy around that that created a lot of challenging issues. And then on the other end, there weren't a whole lot of consequences growing up because I had two people that I could run back and forth from. And if I was in trouble with one, I could go to the other. So there was almost in a sense of lack of authority in my life as when I was growing up. So my dad would go out of town a lot for production gigs because that's what he does for a living. And so we were allowed, in our teenage years to stay home without supervision. So we had a lot of parties and a lot of stuff, and there weren't a lot of consequences for doing things like that, even if it was wrong or even if it was like not appropriate for our age and things like that. And that created like a whole other complex. The languaging that I received a lot growing up was, um, your dad left, your dad left, your dad left. And it was always about him leaving. And so subsequently, the way that that impacted me in my romantic relationship was it doesn't matter what they do as long as they won't go. So everything that I searched for was a partner in romantic relationship of someone that just wouldn't leave. And so the things that I did not get as a result of that, for example, in my prior relationships was, certain things like, security or emotional availability, et cetera, et cetera. There was one focus point, and it was so unconscious because it was drilled in from a very young age. So there wasn't necessarily anything that I was actively doing or choosing. It was the lack of choosing and the lack of asking questions that put me into that space. So those are some of the main things. I mean, moving forward from that, when I was young, there was definitely some encounters with sexual abuse, and that influenced as well my experience of intimate relationships in my very early adulthood, of the way I was treated, the things that I was driven to, objectifying my own self, my own body, of wanting to say, hey, look at me, and that's how you get love, that's how you get attention, because of the ways that I was taught and the ways that I learned. And I just want to remind you guys that none of this stuff, like if you related to any little part of this story, none of this stuff is here to say that you're wrong or you're not worthy or that you got it twisted or the way you think is messed up. It's just these things happen, and our best way to show up in them is through our natural course of action of creating coping mechanisms. So if something happens, we respond in a way that in some level, some way gives us protection. And that's always the goal, is like, how do we stay safe? How do we survive? That's the goal. Number one goal. Okay. Um, so the impacts, I'm sure you guys could see. Within impacts, we have romantic and intimate. That was a lot, many, many years of uncovering and rediscovering and re-understanding. And sometimes, again, it's subconscious, meaning we'll find ourselves in partnership and we're like, this is not working, or this is challenging me, or there's some like weird karmic energy here where, it's on again, off again, on again, off again, or there's some standard not being met in relationship or boundaries not being supported in some way when we're in partnership, but we don't necessarily connect it. Because sometimes we'll hear like, oh, you always end up with your parent, like the opposite parent, someone that's just like them. And we're like, oh, they're nothing like them. But then when we zoom out, we see how much the unconscious patterning is completely like them. But it takes a little while of investigation and actually understanding where we're coming from to understand where we're going towards. Relationally, friendships. I was taught a lot not to trust people, for sure, for sure. And those of you that were at our woman lineage retreat or have done any of this type of work, a lot of the uncovering of some of this information, even for me, happened recently because I had a really long interview with my mom and I asked her, a lot of questions about a lot of things. And she told me about this story where she was little and she was in her backyard playing with some toys, and she had never been given toys really before because they didn't have a lot of money. However, some kids came by and they were like, oh, we'll trade you this for that. And what they were trading was like a little baby rattler and a penny for like her nicest toys. And she was so excited to share it with her parents, like, hey, look what I got. And her parents immediately were like scolded her and made her feel like nothing and was like, you got totally taken advantage of. you're not worthy of holding your ground, blah, blah, blah. They had like this huge experience with her, and she felt so much shame and sadness. And what she took out of that as a learning is that you can't really trust people. People will take advantage of you. And so unconsciously, that was written in her story and her protection mechanism. And then even me growing up, like, even though I had friendships and I had relationships, I had to unlearn the experience of you can't trust people in order to go really deep in my relationships, especially friendship. Because friendship truly, even though, intimacy is important and family stuff is important, like all of that stuff it matters. But friendship is kind of really where the meat and potatoes of seeing who you really are is, if you're in relationship with people that can see that for you and hold that vibration. Friendships are mirrors. Friendships are people that can call you out on your shit in a loving way without making you feel defensive. Hopefully, if you have, the right friends in your life. But working on that dynamic of your life is actually really important for your self-worth and your self-confidence and your ability to be emotionally healthy. It's actually a really big pillar. And then, of course, masculine, feminine dynamics. This has been a massive one for me, the impacts of my upbringing, because I saw a lot with like my mom doing more financially than my dad, but always bad mouthing my dad about his finances. And, you can't, again, trust anyone. You have to protect yourself to stay safe, et cetera, et cetera. There was a lot put into me that put me in a place where I felt like I had to be masculine. I felt like I was the one that had to create a container. I was the one that had to organize everything. I was the driver. I was the person that was taking charge, taking action, being the doer. And within that, I robbed all of my intimate partners in the past of the ability to actually do what the natural masculine does, and lean into my feminine, lean into my softness, lean into my heart, which is so where I want to be anyway. It just took a long time to really admit that, because like being in your heart is really scary for someone that always feels like they need to protect themselves. It's a scary, scary thing. And then, of course, financially, like, luckily, I've been able to work through a lot of that stuff. However, that stuff will take an impact. Like, you'll see yourself, the way you interact with money, the way you spend, the way you save, the way you give, all of those things are impacted based on what you were taught about money in your upbringing. And for me, it was always taught that keep everything that's nice for someone else and we'll just use whatever's left. And it's literally like, you guys, this is how deep this stuff runs. It comes down to like the type of towels you use. It comes down to the type of sheets you have. It comes down to, the type of food you eat. Like, I remember yesterday I was sitting, I picked up some food on my way back to my mom's yesterday after my client. And I was like, do you want anything? Didn't want anything. I got home and she was like eating leftovers. And she's like, look at how like uncooked this broccoli is. And I'm like, well, why are you eating it? And she's like, well, it's left over and it's here. So it's like this scraping by scarcity mentality of like not having your standards higher, that you deserve more because you're scared of, financial stuff. But it's like you're not in a position that you need to be eating food that you don't want to eat right now just because it's leftovers and it's all that's left. You could totally have more, but those that programming runs so deep that it impacts all of the choices and the way you show up and then the way you feel about yourself. Like, it's kind of hard to have a sense of self-esteem or self-worth if you're taking the odds and ends for yourself. Um, Here's another fun example, is like saving the nice bottle of wine for a special occasion, or only wearing the perfume that you love when you're like going out for something special. It's like, do it all the time, do it every day, like celebrate yourself. We have one life. And then, of course, stability, as I said, just going back and forth from household to household, was an interesting experience. And then from there, not having a sense of home, moving out on my own when I was 19, and then going from apartment to apartment or place to place. Like, every time I move in the past, I've felt really uprooted in my sense of self. And this is normal, by the way. Like, Ash, you just moved too, so you know. But anytime you uproot your stuff, your things, it's very root chakra, so it can shake you to your core. However, we can reprogram our understanding of that. And I'm navigating that right now because we're actually in the process of moving to another house, where every time I feel that feeling pop up, I'm like, this is not happening now. This is from then. And I can actually track it back to then and be like, then is not now. And if I allow myself to be present instead of in the trauma of that experience, it gives me the choice to decide, like, do I want to feel uprooted right now or do I want to feel stable? Because like, home is where my heart is, home is where my soul is. It's not where my physical things are. But without that awareness, the last time I moved, I was a train wreck. I was like bawling every day. All my shit was everywhere. I was pissed. I was upset. We were fighting. There was so much going on, but these things are dormant. They're unconscious. And again, guys, feel free to leave anything in the chat if you're feeling this or if you have questions about it. Happy to iterate on anything you need. So let's talk nature versus nurture. This is the big conversation around this topic. Nature is what we think of as pre-wiring and is influenced by genetic inheritance or other biological factors. So think when you go to the doctor and they're like, do you have a history of heart conditions in your family? Things like that. It's like, what are you born with? And now nurture is generally taken as the influence of external factors after conception, meaning the product of exposure, life experiences, and learning on an individual. What did your mom do when she was pregnant with you? When you were born, did you feel traumatized by maybe being in the NICU for a couple days? And then once you were a toddler, were your needs met? And then once you were, in the ages of 5 or 6, finding your identity and your sense of self, were you able to express creatively? Do you have a voice, or were you shut down a lot when you wanted to share things? Were you listened to? Were you heard? Were there lies spreading through your family and your upbringing and your environment growing up? Did you have a connection with your, religious or spiritual world that was implemented on you? So nature, or rather nurture, is kind of like everything that happened from when you were conceived through your lifetime and how those experiences have shaped your reality right now in this moment. And so, whoops. The great debate in psychology, it's argued as to which carries more influence in how one behaves. There are many different theories that apply. Both are important and carry impact. So, yes, and I have yes and here because both are important. And you can't say that someone is predestined or predetermined to be a certain way, because we've seen evidence of people that have come from really difficult environments and thrived. We've seen people that have had really challenging backgrounds and said, I'm going to be in my nurture right now and choose and take deliberate action around my choices and my ability to grow through these experiences, instead of allow these experiences to dictate the way that I show up, the way that I feel, and everything in between. Again, it's not to say that nature does not have a factor. And I'm not a psychologist, but in all of the work I've done, I've found that when we blame nature for things being the way they are, meaning I was born like this, my mom had depression, my dad had this, and that means that I'm going to have it, it kind of takes our power away. It kind of basically says that I'm predisposed for this, and that means that I don't have choice. And that means that if this is what's predestined for me, I'm going to allow myself to be in a space where I don't get to decide. I don't get to show up in the choice. And what happens when we lean a little more into nurture is we give ourselves the space to learn from our experiences, to have the things that showed up, regardless if they were painful or not, be something that offers us some sort of wisdom, some sort of learning in this kind of time around of the life that we're experiencing. And something I heard the other day that really stuck with me is I used to refer to this as seasons of our life, like chapters of our life. But it's like we've all lived like so many lifetimes in this lifetime. And then we're going to live so many more lifetimes again in this lifetime. And we don't even know what's to come. We know what was. And so if we take what was and we live in the presence of that, and we're like, this is how it's been, so this is how I'm going to be. I need to keep myself safe. My coping mechanisms have worked, blah, blah, blah. And we don't stay interested in how nurture can evolve us. We stay stagnant. We kind of stay in the same place and we stop evolving. And it's kind of funny too, because aha moments, breakthroughs, things where you're just like all of a sudden see something differently happens in an instant. It's not like it takes years and years and years to figure this shit out. It happens like that. As soon as that moment happens, it's almost like a quantum leap of change happens, and all of a sudden you can't unsee what you've seen. However, that process cannot necessarily be rushed. So while we think, oh, in an instant I should be able to see this differently than I see it now, realistically, nothing determines whether that switch goes or shuts off. However, when we stay open to those aha moments, we give ourselves the space and opportunity to lean into the switch a little bit sooner and to be willing to allow that switch to influence us. Like, what am I not willing to look at? What am I not willing to allow to be a pro versus a con? And that kind of comes too with empowering questions, is how are we relating? How are we interacting with the world around us, specifically in the context of this conversation? How are we relating to our experiences? How are we relating to our trauma? How are we relating to what we've been through versus what we actually have power over right now? Just reading in the chat, I spend too long trying to forget all of my traumas because I thought it made me broken or unworthy. I didn't believe that I could be better than my mistakes. Thankful for these learning moments now. Heck yes. And trauma is an interesting one because we'll talk about that too. And it's subjective, because two people can go through the same experience and have a totally different outcome in the way that they've processed that information. And we could be sitting in our own personal hell for the rest of our lives of saying, like, I did this, and now because of that, I should suffer. And really, it's just like not so. The most incredible, amazing teachers, leaders, healers, people in the world that have the biggest influence, like, they're not exempt from messing up. And just because you're messing up is interpreted by you or judged by you in a certain way doesn't mean it's any different than another learning experience for another human being. So can we just, like, maybe in this moment even normalize allowing our mistakes to grow us instead of limit us into that space? Okay, we are programmed. This is big. Children have received over 25,000 hours of programming by the time they're 8 years old. And programming, what do I mean by that? I mean language, pictures, sound, information, beliefs about who they are, what they're capable of, how they get to show up in the world, their worthiness, their self-esteem, etc., etc. And they also see an average of 40,000 commercials per year. This is huge. I also want to just like pause on this for a sec with you guys, because if you consider what these commercials are saying, what the content of them is, and what they're implying, how that influences, especially our next generation. I was talking to my facialist yesterday, who's like a freaking goddess of the world, and she's like, I don't understand how this next generation is going to make it. Like, she's like, I have faith. I have daughters, and they're beautiful and incredible and strong and wise. But she's like, I would not have survived growing up with the influence of what our kids have to deal with right now, between social media and social norms and all of that other stuff. Like, it's really, really, really intensive. And it creates a huge sense of not enoughness. And when you're like, think back for all of us when we were 8 years old, when we were 6 years old, when we were 10 years old, what we saw influenced the way that we were showing up. And so if all you're seeing, which a lot of us did kind of grow up with this, Barbie dolls and things like that, thigh gap, like all of that stuff, like no wonder many of us grew up with body image issues. Again, we were programmed to be only acknowledged when we did something good. So no wonder when we show up, we're always looking for that quick hit of acknowledgement. We're always looking for, how can I do better? How can I be better? Like, many times when we end out for the workday, we still feel undone. We still feel like there's more I could do. I was raised on soaps, and I would wonder why my life was drama. I love that. So real. And all the discord and the hatred in the news and hidden messages showcasing power struggle and greed. It's so true. I mean, I don't even watch the news, and I'm kind of terrified because once in a while I'll get like sweet little tabloids on some of my feeds, and I'm like, holy shit, is this like really what we're paying attention to? And thank God, I'm so submerged in this work, and I'm expanded in my questioning around what is for me and what's not for me. But if I was 8 or 10, so impressionable. And so we really have to have a lot of grace with our experience of reality up until now. Is that, like, yeah, I might be showing up this way, or maybe in the past I've been showing up this way for a while, and I'm really trying to reprocess, but we have to unlearn. And to unlearn, there's the whole process in that too, which we'll talk about in a little bit. We are humans. We learn information as we go. The first thing we are exposed to is our parents and their style of operating, communicating, interacting, and relating to us and the world, as well as culture environment we live in. So pause for a sec. Consider your parents. Bless them, they're amazing and they're doing the best they can. But maybe consider times that you saw them have an interaction or a conversation that you're like, whoa, I can't believe they handled it that way. Or maybe consider any habits or patterning that they have that you look at and you're like, oh man, like, wow, like I wish I could support in some way. Or maybe it brings something forward for you where you're like, this is the way, like from a neutral observer, this is the way that my environment, my parents, and my culture operate and interact and communicate. And if I was just a baby sponge in that time and I absorbed all of that, that is how I learned how to operate too. And that's a pretty mind-blowing understanding for me, for sure. The tendency to like work, 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 work above everything else. If you get a good gig, you take it no matter what, even if you need to compromise birthdays, holidays, family time, like that was programmed in me at a very young age. And I even have challenges with my partner now where it's like, he's like, oh, well, why are you taking that? Why are you taking? I'm like, because it's work and that's what I do. But like the re-questioning of that, I'm like, is that even my choice? Is that something I decided and wanted and then was decided to show up for? All my friends are worried about their kids and body image and losing their innocence at a young age. It's really intense, especially for girls. I mean, boys too, for sure, hands down. But there's a lot in there to question, to question. And we're examples of it, you know. But we can't be examples of something we're not practicing ourselves. So this information gives us the insight to that. Okay. So let's talk about trauma. I found some amazing definitions of trauma online, you guys. However, most of the definitions that I initially found said something along the lines of going through an experience that makes you feel unsafe or unwell, that's extremely tragic, like rape or witnessing murder or drug abuse, things like that. And I'm like, hold on, this is like not accurate. This is not even close to accurate. And the best definition I could find to offer you guys is trauma is the response to a deeply distressing or disturbing event that overwhelms an individual's ability to cope, causes feelings of helplessness, diminishes their sense of self and their ability to feel a full range of emotions and experiences. So let me just pause and validate any of you that have navigated moments where you were like shut down, meaning like you had something to say, it was really important to you, and your parent was like, nope, don't have time or can't listen to you right now. Let's just say, like, that is also trauma. That's distressing. You're a little kid. You don't have the ability to cope with feeling shut down, and it diminishes your sense of self. And we're so good at comparing ourselves to other people's trauma that we don't even validate or consider what we navigated, regardless of the cultural viewpoint of how intense it was or wasn't. And that blocks our healing. It doesn't matter what it was, it matters how it made you feel. And so maybe trauma was, for example, I had a really traumatic event when I was little, and I can remember it like it was day because it was actually literally in this room that I'm in right now, which is insane. My dad dropped us off to be with my mom, and my mom she had a really difficult a partner, like a boyfriend for a long time, and it was a very abusive relationship. Um, and the guy was just kind of a mess. And I remember coming home and I ran into this room. This was her room at the time. And I ran over to the glass door because I didn't find her in the house. And she was outside with her boyfriend and they were both naked and they were like watering the lawn. No big deal, right? But as like a 6 or 7 year old, like seeing a grown man naked right there, just like that, like it was nothing, I was like shook. Like I literally ran back to my dad's car sobbing and he's like, it's okay. And then like they both sat me down and talked to me. And her boyfriend was like, if anything, I should be embarrassed, not you. And like invalidated my experience. And I was just like, didn't even know how to cope with it or understand it because I felt unsafe and not because anything happened to me, but just because something happened and it affected me because I didn't understand it and I didn't know how to handle it. And so in that moment, it's like, okay, watching my mom with her body in that way, with this person, even though they were in a relationship, with all the turmoil with my dad, like there was a lot of feelings that came up for me that I didn't understand. So it diminished my sense of self and my ability to feel a full range of emotion because I felt like I didn't have the right to feel scared or anything in that moment. So let's talk a little more about traumas. We diminish our trauma because it's not as bad as someone else had it, or maybe it was never recognized by self or others as such. This funny TikTok's kind of going around in our community, and the girl's like impersonating her and her mom, and she's like, her mom is like, what do you mean? It was just a regular Wednesday. And she's like, all of my trauma. Like, that's because to you, it was a fucking regular Wednesday. To me, it was like this insane experience of confusion and misalignment with emotional safety, truly. And so if someone else doesn't recognize it as trauma, a lot of times we diminish it and we're like, it's not fair for me to feel this way. And we shame ourselves for feeling some type of way. And again, that's another way that it blocks our healing. Trauma is subjective, so it cannot be determined on a rating scale or understood by anyone else. Meaning, if something affected you in a certain way, the same thing could have happened to someone else, and it doesn't mean it will affect them in that way either. So, allowing ourselves the ability to say, my feelings are valid, my experience is valid. Something happened and it made me feel unsafe in some type of way, and I'm going to allow myself to recognize that that's what came up for me instead of making myself wrong for it because someone else doesn't understand it. Trauma usually occurs when something happens that makes us feel unsafe in some way, and then we've developed a coping mechanism, healthy or unhealthy, to navigate events similar in the future. So, while that experience happened, from then on, of course, my intimate relationships were a little challenging to navigate. However, it doesn't mean that I necessarily drew that conclusion or tied those things in, meaning I'm having a challenge here because of this as what I saw. So when we have a traumatic event or something that happens, and especially when we don't validate and heal, we carry that event in the back depths of our mind, depths of our memories. And it influences that anytime we see something out in the world, even as adults, that we're like, okay, this reminds me a lot like that. What did I do in that situation to make sure I was safe? Oh, I shut down. Oh, I pulled back. Oh, I withdrew. Maybe that's a good idea right now. And then what happens is that because that danger is not actually there, it's the projection of that danger that's there. Our projection is creating a false narrative about how we're interacting with the experience. So whether it's in partnership or relationship or, even in jobs, like maybe you felt unworthy. Like, again, me growing up, not feeling like recognizable unless I did something really good. And then showing up in a job and doing something really good, really good, really good, and never getting acknowledged for it. All of a sudden, I'm like, I'm back in my home again. I'm back in my childhood experience again. And then I'm pissed off at my boss. Why don't they recognize me? I do so much. I should be getting a promotion, yada, 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 and on we go. But yet a business is just like looking out for their bottom line and they don't really have an opening to promote me, but I'm making it this crazy story about everything that has to do with like my internal experience. So here we are playing out our shit over and over and over and over again. And the piece is that we have to take accountability and responsibility for the fact that we attracted that because we're given an opportunity here. This is big. We're given an opportunity to work out and heal that thing. Every time something comes up that reminds us of that old experience, it's another chance to be complete with the wound and heal it for that exact moment and be done with it. But yet when we show up in the same way, I need to protect myself. I'm not willing to dive in. I'm not willing to get curious about this. Then we play out the same thing and it keeps coming up. And then it's like, why does this always happen? Why does the same relationship show up? Why does the same job thing show up? Why does all of this keep happening? Because it's happening to give you more chances. We get unlimited chances to work through it, which is sick. Okay, this is my favorite thing, you guys, to explain how our internal experience shapes our reality. So if you look over here to the left, you'll see external event equals X. So whatever's happening, this is X. We have these things called meta programs. This is an NLP communication model. So this is how we understand and view the world. In the meta programs are our filters, our values, beliefs, language, memory, decisions, time coding. Values, meaning what's most important to us? What have we been taught is most important to us? Beliefs, what do I believe to be true about myself and my abilities? Language, someone said XYZ. What does my brain code XYZ to mean versus what their brain codes XYZ? For example, the word unbelievable. Oh my God, this was unbelievable. For you, unbelievable might mean like, it was fucking horrible, like unbelievable, God. But for them, unbelievable might be mind blowing. Everyone's experiencing language differently, okay? Memories, something that happened to you previously in the past that is neuro associating with the experience that you're observing. Decisions, how do you make decisions based on what's going on? Do you need to consult someone? Do you need to talk to someone? Do you see something happening? Then you make a decision on it. And then time coding, what happens in what order. Then the next step, based on those filters, your brain, everyone's brain, deletes, distorts, and generalizes. So it'll literally delete information and be like, that didn't happen because it doesn't align with my values. That didn't happen because I don't want to believe it because it brings up trauma. Or distorts. Someone comes up to you or you see a car accident and the car accident happens and someone's like, oh my God, that car just like smashed into the other car. And then you're like a person that's like all into the drama. So you're like, oh my God, mom, I just saw this car accident. This car like plowed through this other car. You've distorted the story now, and now the story sounds differently because that's what you're telling yourself about the experience. Then generalizations. I saw this happen, so that means it always happens like this. Anytime I see a guy that's abusive towards a girl, it always will end up this way. Whatever we want to say for that. And then so in your mind, if you see over here, the yellow square internal representation, meaning the X on this side and the X on the external event are two very different experiences. Because after delete, distort, and generalize, you've got a different version of the story. You do not have the story of what actually happened. You have the story of what you've decided happened based on your meta programs. Okay? Then that whole situation influences your state of mind. I'm so upset, this happened, blah, 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 that happened. And then it affects your physiology, which we don't always catch this. Your shoulders may be round forward, your body feels tired, you have a physical reaction. And from that space comes your behavior, your response, and your reaction of what you show up in the outer world with. And here we are thinking we're like interacting with the world like it's nothing. Like, look at how many steps an external event has to go through before we respond. Triggers, man. Triggers. And so the part that we forget, I think, that we're responsible for is this meta programs part, and that's like the initial piece. What am I valuing? What am I believing? What type of language am I using? And how similar are these to other memories that I've had? And am I willing to see this differently? And what decision do I make as a result of it? Et cetera, et cetera. And then all of a sudden, we can question what we're deleting or distorting or generalizing. Is that really true every time? All the time? Never really? And we give ourselves a space to zoom out. Wow, okay. So then all of a sudden the internal representation becomes a little bit more neutral, and we can't always have like 100% clean side of the street, but it becomes a little more neutral to the point where the external event can be perceived as it is versus the version in which we want to see. And this is huge, guys. This plays out in our relationship and how we interact with the world. And the question that I want you to be asking based on this webinar is it me or is it how I was raised? Your control, your navigation through meta programs determines if it's you or if it's how you were raised based on how you show up in the world. So, and I'll give you guys space to share if you want. What were you taught? And you can pick any of these that maybe you noticed throughout this time together. Don't be shy. Feel free to unmute yourself. What were you taught about? Maybe pick one or two of these that you're like, wow, okay.
I'll share.
Okay.
Okay, so first, money for me was scarcity. Is all kind of growing up in a household where money wasn't always easy, or money was coming and going. Actually grew up having money and then losing everything, and then since then it just became money is scarcity. So I see myself around money that I still I cling on to it. So money is still something I'm working on, and it's just energy, but I'm definitely seeing it around me, and I just have more awareness now how this is also my parents' story, and I don't need to take this story on. And relationships as well, I just see that like my parents or my upbringing was, it wasn't very open and communicative. It was very kind of passive aggressive and pretending on the outside to be a certain way. And so yeah, so for me, I never knew people that were real and true to themselves. It was just fake, a lot of fakeness around. So for me now, being real and authentic still feels really scary for my system. So yeah, and that means that makes my worth, I thought, was equal to what I look like, my productivity. Yeah, it's very much what's on the outside world. So that's very much the way I grew up. My grandparents were that way, and now I'm changing this story. So hopefully my kids won't need to think that way.
I love that. Intergenerational and being able to really zoom out. And I love that question, is this mine? Is this mine or is this someone else's? Because we get to decide the way that we want to operate and not just based on one experience or one influence. And it gives us space to really take our power back. Okay, so here's the big one is you have choice. The space between knowing you have a choice and making a different one begins with accountability and asking questions. It's unlearning our old ways of being and also requires a grieving process of that season of our lives. So, the first step obviously is just becoming aware that the way we operate doesn't have to be the way that we operate. Okay. And that can be really scary in itself because it's like you're free falling, you're free floating. Whoa, who is it that I want to be now? What is it that I want to do? What choices do I want to make? And to get there, we have to take accountability of like, I have held this belief system or this way of being so high in my life for so long and been so attached to this way of being. So I'm going to be accountable now that maybe that wasn't necessarily the most healthy process for myself. And that's okay, right? And then unlearning our old ways of being of, okay, so when things come up, I'm willing to zoom out and I'm willing to take a peek at how I could do this differently. And unlearning it's a surrender, it's a grieving process because we tend to cling to that which we know, even if that which we know is unhealthy. And so if we allow ourselves the space to ungrip, to surrender, there may be some space in there that grieving needs to take place of like, I am letting go of this version. And even though I'm saddened by it, I'm healing because of it. Here is a really practical step by step for healing. Obviously, there's a million other steps that could be helpful. But these I find just to be really powerful ways to tap in. Number one, acknowledge your experience. Validate yourself and avoid minimizing your experience. So just acknowledging it like, okay, this is how it's been. That's okay. It's not my fault. It's no one's fault. Number two, take accountability. You cannot change the past, but you can navigate your present moment. So it's not this is how it's been, so this is how it's always going to be. It's this is how it's been, and this is how it is now. And I'm willing to do the work to make the choices and the changes that allow me that space. Number three, seek support. Tune into the people in your life that you can talk about the awarenesses you're having, or find a coach or a therapist that you can really trust and you feel safe with, especially if there's layers and layers that you're uncovering and you're not really sure how to navigate through it. Number five, take care of your health. Make conscious choices to nourish your body and mind. When you're healing, it's really important that you're not making choices out of scarcity or escapism, but instead confrontation, even if it's challenging, but a healthy way of being, whether it's a meditation practice or movement practice or healthy eating, or even just kind self talk. That's a great way to heal. Number five, allow yourself to find radical acceptance and surrender. It just is. It's a big one, just is. Number six, replace unhealthy habits and choices with healthy ones for this season of your life, meaning we need different things for every season of our life. And being willing to know that maybe, my way of coping before was to go out and party, or my way of coping before was to do really intense movement practices, or my way of coping before was to shut down and block people out and isolate. Maybe now you've got a different calling in this season of your life to allow for more. Number seven, be patient with yourself. This path is not going to be linear and it's layered like an onion. So some days we feel like we're rocking it out and we got it all figured out. And then other days we're like, what in God's name just happened? And that's okay. It's easy to see the negative and say, I'm totally backtracked. I'm set off right now and I'm back to the first place. However, as we know it's not linear, we know that at least the process is going up and down, but it's still going in an upward trajectory. That's the most important thing, is that like your life will be so much greater every single day than it was before, as long as you're still on the upward trajectory and you're awake. That's the most important thing. Are we awake? Reframe. This is huge. Gratitude and compassion for our parents, our environment, our upbringing, and most importantly, ourselves. We are all doing the best we can in every single moment. And I promise to God, your environment, your culture, your people, your parents, whatever we've seen on TV, every single one of these people, as hard as it is to admit, have all been doing the best they can with what they've got. And that this is a tough one. People don't have negative intentions. It might feel negative, but people are not actually intending to create harm. It's just their priorities and the things that they're intending for subsequently create harm, and their priorities are more important than the harm. But the harm is not intentional, right? And that goes with our parents. And there's a lot in that gratitude, compassion piece, which we could spend a 7-day retreat on that, let alone 3 seconds right now. So how do we start to shift? What are the steps? Become more aware of your reactive tendencies. Notice when you feel turmoil or discord. And that goes with being in the environment you grew up in or just being in your environment today. What are the things that set you off? What are the things that come up and you're like, oh God, like you're clenching or something in you is giving some type of warning signal? And then the next step after becoming aware that that's there is getting curious instead of judgmental. I'm here again. I'm feeling this again. No, no, no. I'm genuinely curious. Like this keeps coming up. Shit, we might as well deal with it now, Like let's be inquisitive about this experience. And then the last one here is see yourself through the lens of compassion, gentleness. It's okay. We're healing, we're expanding, we're breathing, we're figuring it out. But at least we're trying. At least we're trying, even if we don't always hit the mark. We're trying. Big one. And so for those of you that are kind of, moving towards maybe you've already discovered the experience and now you want to strengthen, emotional intelligence is pretty much one of the most important number one things you can really use. There's one pillar that's missing on here, which I'll go into, but self-awareness is just knowing that an emotion or feeling is happening. Boom. I'm aware, I'm feeling X, and I've identified that. Self-management is kind of the inquisitive part. I'm managing the way I show up about it. I'm adaptable. I have a positive outlook. And I'm allowing myself to discover the way that my contribution based on my own awareness of my emotion is impacting the outer world. So I'm managing that experience. Social awareness, this is empathy. Organizational awareness, meaning you see when something around you is happening in others. So you're like, oh, I've tracked that. I see something's going on, and I'm not going to walk in the room and celebrate myself when I see like a moment that it's not the right time. Or I'm not going to walk in the room and put a damper on something that's going on when someone else is feeling that way. Like I have the awareness that there's something happening. The fourth of 5 pillars is relationship management. That's how do you actually show up when you do have the awareness that something is present? How are you managing conflict? This is a huge one, you guys. No one likes to have uncomfortable conversations at all. We just don't, right? But how you handle it isn't a testament to your emotional intelligence, right? How do you work together? How do you inspire? How do you connect? How do you influence? And then the last pillar that isn't necessarily on here is motivation, knowing what moves people, yourself and others. And when you work on these 5 pillars together, it really creates a beautiful nest for you to start to heal some of those other wounds, because then you're paying attention to the emotions that are linked that create influence based on the upbringing of your experience. Okay. I want you to just take a moment and reflect on what you're present with right now. Obviously, that's so important. I would otherwise give time to share, but we are out of time. So maybe you can just spend like a moment or two right after this call and just journal on it. Just give yourself a chance to journal on it a little bit. Okay. And lastly, all of the things that we talked about today and much, much more are going to be the main focus points in our next round of mentorship, which is a weekly group coaching program that we have in our community that is freaking life changing. It's like so awesome to come to a safe space where you can really work some of this stuff out. And we have the opportunity to just have, live group coaching and an experience together where we move through this. And our first section is family, inherited beliefs, and forgiveness. So we'll really go into the depths of this experience right here. And that's about it. That wraps us up. And I'm so grateful that we had this time to explore all these amazing topics. And you guys are just amazing. Thanks for showing up and making it happen. As we know, this stuff is important. And the intention with all of this work is always to see, like, how do we navigate ourselves so we show up in the world in a way that really just adds light and adds healing and adds peace versus interacting trauma with trauma or old stories or memories or biases with old stories and memories and biases. So that's the goal, it's just to be gentle and to heal. So I hope you guys got a lot from this. So grateful for your time. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And if you have any questions or anything, please feel free to reach out. Love you guys.